Hello, everyone. Welcome. Good afternoon. I see that many of you are already writing on the chat. That is always nice to see. I like when people participate in the classes. We have Sarah Bloomberg. Tzaharaim Tov to you. Shali Chochinov. Hello. You like the music? Okay. I think I played the same music last time. It's the new timer that I created for the class. Or maybe you were at the beginning. Hello, David Wilder, Rocky Pollack. Great way to spend the noon hour, Rabbi. Oh, thank you. Yeah, for me too. It's a great way to spend my afternoon studying a little bit of Torah. What a parsha we have this week. It's Parshat Noach. We're talking about the flood, but also talks about the Tower of Babel. And it's so difficult to choose what to say about this parsha. So juicy, so much information, so much teachings. So much inspiration that we can get from this week Torah portion. But again, welcome everyone. If this is the first time you catch one of our streams, one of our classes, please remember to subscribe to our channels. Hit that bell so you will be notified every time we go live. So you will never miss any of our content. Sometimes we go live, sometimes we upload things to our channel. And if you are subscribed, you're going to be notified every time you do that, and you're going to get everything that we put out there on the internet. And yeah, it's so good. Okay, so I think we can start with the class. We are already a few minutes late. I'm sorry about that. But I was about to start the class and I forgot to prepare myself a little coffee. It's always good to have a coffee and Torah. So maybe that should be the next title for the class. Torah and coffee. But I think Chabad already got that one, so we cannot use it. So as I mentioned before, we are going to study today about Noach. And the first, again, so many things. I guess if you want to study a little bit more about this, you have to show up on Saturday at the Shaare Zedek services because the sermon, of course, is going to be inspired by this parsha. Hello, Marina Eisen. Welcome. So let's go to the class with the first verse from Parshat Noach that I wanted to share with you. And this one is the opening of the parsha, basically. And it's very interesting. It said, Ele toldot Noach, Noach ish tzadik tamim haya b'dorotav, et haElohim ithalech Noach. These are the generation of Noah. Noah was a righteous man and perfect in his generation. Noah walked with God. But this is the thing. Rashi, the famous Rashi, the commentator, he noticed something wrong about the way this verse is written. Let's see if you can see there what is missing in this verse. These are the generation of Noah. Noah was a righteous man and perfect in his generations. Noah walked with God. What is missing there? If you have a clue about that, type it in the chat. I'm curious if you notice what Rashi noticed that is missing in this verse. So I will have a little bit of a coffee while I give you a few seconds to type if you want on the chat and let me know what you think. Okay. This is what Rashi noticed about this verse. It says, these are the generation of Noah. But then the verse doesn't bring any kind of generations. Every time the Torah says these are the generations, immediately after you have names of family members, right? Either because it's going to be talking about the previous generation or the future generations. So it will be logic, says Rashi, that it should say these are the generation of Noah, and then it will have a list with the children of Noah. But that's not what the verse says. So Rashi is a little bit surprised of the ways this verse is presented. So this is what Rashi says. And I'm going to go to the next slide so you will see the answer. Very interesting. The main offspring of righteous people are their good deeds. The true descendants of a tzaddik are not the physical children he leaves behind, but his acts of kindness. So now when we go back to the verse, you can see exactly what Rashi is talking about. These are the generation of Noah. What are the generation of Noah? Not who, but what? Noah was a righteous man and perfect in his generation. Noah walked with God. That was Noah's legacy. Yes, he had children. He had a family. But even more important than that was everything that he did for the world. And we know that even though he was great, he was an amazing human being, he couldn't spare that generation. It wasn't enough to prevent the flood. But nevertheless, the fact that even though he lived in a corrupt society, he remained a righteous person. And that is mentioned that in the verse. And the fact that he was able to overcome the negative influence of his environment, that was the real legacy from Noah. So this is something that I believe we can all relate. Sometimes we read in the news and we see that the world is far from perfect. It's easy to get tempted to take shortcuts in life and to take advantage of other people. Why? Because everybody does it. Come on, everybody does it. Nobody gets surprised anymore. And I'm pretty sure I won't get caught. Sometimes we think that way, but Noah is teaching us doesn't really matter. You always have to be a righteous person. Doesn't matter what goes around you. Everybody does it. It's not a Jewish value. That should never be an excuse for us to justify any behavior. Noah is telling us here we should know what is right and what is wrong, and that's what we should be doing in our lives regardless of what other people do. You do that, that becomes your legacy. That's your, in the words of the Torah, your generations. And that's why Noah is remembered until this day. That's why he was rewarded with being the one building the ark and starting a new world. Remember that Noah is at the same level of Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve were the first men and women, and then we have a whole world that came after them. That world was destroyed with the flood. Now Noah and his family became the new Adam and Eve, and they were the ones creating the world that we know. So it's almost like we don't really come from Adam and Eve, we come from Noah's family. That's something that we don't even think about. But according to the Torah, if you believe the biblical narrative, we are descendants of Noah. In other words, we are all Noahites. And that's something very interesting. Keep it in mind, that word, Noahide, because it's going to come back in the later part of the class. Let's continue with this. So remember what Rashi said, the main offspring, we read this one. Let's see a little bit what other rabbis have to say about this. Because also the words in his generation, let's go back to this, implied other things as well. And this is a very famous midrash about this verse. The fact that it says, Noah was a righteous man and perfect in his generations. Is that something that it was written to praise Noah? Right? To say, look at this man. He was perfect despite everything else. Or what the verse is trying to say is he was perfect compared to everything else. It's not the same. So being a righteous person is an absolute value or is relative to the people around you? It's like the saying in the land of the blind, right? So there is a division among rabbis when they try to define Noah. Some people said, yeah, sure, he was a tzaddik, but only because if you compare him to other people around, yeah, of course, yeah, he was a tzaddik. But if he will be a person coming from a different kind of generation when there were other great people around him, he wouldn't even be noticed. Let's see. Let's go to the Talmud and to the Midrash to understand other interpretations about the character and the morals of Noah. Some of our sages interpret the words "in his generation" in Noah's favor and note how much more righteous he would have been if he had lived in a generation of righteous people. Other sages interpret the phrase derogatorily by explaining that in comparison with Noah's own generation, yeah, sure, he was considered righteous, but if he had lived in Abraham's generation, that is only 10 generations after Noah, by the way, he will not have been considered of any importance. In other words, probably around Abraham, there were many other people that were like Noah, but because compared with Abraham, they were nothing. We don't even know about them. So this is the tension in rabbinic interpretation. Some people think that in his generation is a good thing. Some other people say, everything is relative. Shelley, you said Hashem picked him above all others in his generation. Yeah, he picked him above all others because he was the best of the bunch. But that doesn't necessarily mean that he was great. You understand here the difference? One interpretation is he was awesome. And the other one is he was just a little bit better than the others. So the two things. And there will be other things that the rabbis will bring to support one position or the other. One of the things, for example, is that Noah never, when God said to Noah, "I'm going to destroy the world," Noah never fought with God saying, "Hey, what do you mean that you're going to destroy the world? And you call yourself a righteous God and you're going to destroy everybody? How do you know if there is, maybe there are some righteous people, in the other side of the planet that I'm." Noah never said that. But when God said to Abraham, "I'm going to destroy the world," when God said to Abraham, "I'm going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah," Abraham said, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, hold your horses there. What if there are righteous people living there? Are you going to destroy the cities anyway? What about the righteous people? Aren't they good enough to spare that city?" So we can kind of see the difference between Noah and Abraham. Okay, let me expand a little bit on this. Some other rabbis said that the difference between Noah and Abraham is the way God communicated them what God was about to do. You see, when God told Noah that God was going to destroy the world with the flood, the word God uses in Hebrew, I believe it's a nikva, which is it's one of the words used in the Torah to imply death. It's the same word that is used, for example, when the patriarchs passed away, vayigva, vayamot. It's two words that they use, vayigva, vayamot. Technically, in modern Hebrew, they are kind of synonyms. Sometimes in the Torah, they are translated that, and he died, or passed away and dying. Even in English, we have two words, passing away and dying. They implied kind of the same thing, but in the biblical language, we know that different words have absolutely different meanings, so we have to be very careful in the Hebrew. If there are two different words, they mean two different things. They are not synonyms. So what is vayigva? What is vayamot? Well, one interpretation is that the word vayigva is used for the patriarchs because vayigva implies a painless death. It's when somebody dies, for example, on his sleep. And the rabbis understand that that was the way the patriarchs passed away, in their sleep. They were numb. They didn't feel a thing. God just took their lives away from them, and that it was a reward for their righteousness. And the fact that God is using the same word to describe the destruction of the world with the flood, we can understand that thing with the patriarchs, right? But with this corrupt world, why would God destroy the world using the same word that implies painless death? And the rabbis continue by saying that that was as a reward to Noah. Because otherwise, they would say, can you imagine Noah's reaction to see a world that is being destroyed in front of his eyes, suffering a painful death? Can you imagine the post-traumatic stress that this individual will have to suffer for the rest of his life? So in order to spare Noah from that suffering, God announced to him that he was going to destroy the world, but in a painless way. And that is a justification from some rabbis and why Noah didn't complain to God, that when God said, I'm going to destroy the world. In other words, when you go and read about Abraham, when God announces that they're going to destroy Sodom, it implies that it's going to be destroyed by fire, and it will be a very traumatic situation. So Abraham tried to stop God from doing that. As I said, that's one of the justification of Noah from the rabbis, who thinks that saying in his generation is something in his favor, not to try to say that it was just a little bit better than the rest. Yeah, so that's what the two things implied in the verse. But let's keep moving with the next text. As the lone tzaddik in a completely corrupt society, Noah's ability to ascend the spiritual ladder was constricted. The companionship and inspiration of such a great man as Abraham would have made Noah greater. This potential was what made Noah worthy of being saved from the flood. Although the deplorable condition of his generation prevented him from achieving his potential, his spiritual stature was such that he had lived in a more conducive time, he would have been even greater. Noah was prevented by circumstances from reaching higher than he did. But his total desire to serve God was rewarded. Oh, this is beautiful. This is from the Maharal of Prague, famous for creating the golem, by the way. So what he's saying here is both Noah and Abraham were tzaddik, absolutely tzaddik. The difference is Noah didn't have a mentor. Very important. Noah didn't have anybody to teach him things. And there is that much that you can figure out by yourself. There is that much. Sometimes you need mentors to help you go to the next level. This is kind of something that I mentioned on my sermon on Yom Kippur, that if you want to increase your wisdom, you need to learn something new, but you need somebody to teach you that something new. Sometimes, yes, of course, you learn from your mistakes, but it's not enough. Sometimes you need a mentor to teach you other things that you cannot figure out by yourself. Well, you might think, if that's true, who was Abraham's mentor? Any guesses? If you have a guess of who was Abraham's mentor, type it in the chat while I have a little bit more coffee. I want to hear your guesses. Come on, chat is too quiet today. No guesses. Okay. So I will give you my answer. And what the rabbi said is Abraham's mentor was no other than Noah. I say, whoa, what do you mean Noah? And Noah lived 10 generations before Abraham. So how is that possible? Good question. You know what the answer is? Remember at the beginning of the Torah that it says that people used to live almost 900 years? Well, eventually God changed the rule and made it that people wouldn't live more than 120 years. But Noah belongs to the people who were born before God changed the rules. So if you calculate the years and the 10 generations between one and the other, that will tell you that Noah was still alive when Abraham was born. And the Midrash put the two together, and the Midrash explained that Noah was Abraham's mentor. And you see, usually the best mentors are the ones who already made all the mistakes, and they already learned from all those mistakes, so they can guide you so you won't make those same mistakes. Noah realized, because now we are talking about what? Another 700 years after the flood, he had time to think and to learn many other things, and he learned from everything that he didn't do back then. So Noah talked to Abraham and to say, perhaps I should have fought with God. I should have tried to convince God not to destroy the world. Maybe the world will need another opportunity and stuff like that. Then when the same thing happened to Abraham, Abraham argues with God to try to save humanity. Interesting interpretation that the Midrash brings. Hello, Rina. Welcome to the class. What is his spouse? Okay, maybe it was. I don't know. And I apologize in advance. I realize that my internet is spotty. It's cutting in and out. So if you have any problems, it's my internet. So I'm sorry about that. So let's continue. Another verse that I want to present for you. It says, God spoke to Noah and his sons with him, and he said, as for me, I am herewith establishing my covenant with you, with your descendants after you, and with every living creature that is with you, the birds, the livestock, and every wild animal with you, are all going out of the ark, every animal on earth. I will establish my covenant with you, that never again will all living being be destroyed by the waters of a flood, and there will never again be a flood to destroy the earth. So, I have a question for you here. You know how covenants work, right? I do something, you do something. So God is establishing a covenant with humanity, and God is saying, I will never destroy the world again. But what is God asking humanity in return for that covenant? Any clues? Type it in the chat. Okay? Have you ever heard about the 7 Noahide laws? So basically, the rabbis understand that this covenant with Noah was a set of 7 laws that every human being should follow in this world. Everything else is great. We can all do better than these 7 laws, but God says, as part of this new covenant, I'm expecting that every human being on earth follows at least these 7 laws. And it goes like this. Let me read it for you, because this is something very important, and sometimes it's not properly understood. It says, in Judaism, the 7 laws of Noah, or the Noahide laws, are a set of moral imperatives that, according to the Talmud, were given by God as a binding set of laws for the children of Noah, that is, all of humanity. Any non-Jew who adheres to these laws is regarded as a righteous Gentile and is assured of a place in the world to come. The final reward of the righteous adherents are called Bnei Noach, the children of Noah, or Noahites. The Talmud Masechet Sanhedrin, page 56b, are, drum rolls, number 1, the prohibition of blasphemy. Number 2, prohibition of idolatry. Number 3, the requirement of maintaining courts to provide legal recourse. Number 4, the prohibition of murder. Number 5, the prohibition of sexual misconduct or adultery. Number 6, the prohibition of theft. Number 7, the prohibition of eating flesh taken from an animal while it is still alive. Have you ever heard about those Noahide laws? I'm curious if you ever heard about that. It's what is expected from every human being, basically. And it became kind of trendy within Judaism because it's like for Judaism there are kosher religions and non-kosher religions. It's like everything is good with the 7 laws of Noah, but number 2 is the prohibition of idolatry. So what do you do with religions around the world that they are basically ethical religions that, they believe in courts of justice, they believe in the prohibition of murder, they believe in prohibition of sexual misconduct, of adultery, they believe in prohibition of theft, they believe that we shouldn't eat an animal parts while still alive and everything, but they worship idols. They are not monotheistic. So what do we do in that case? It's for some rabbis that's problematic to accept forms of religion that did not follow the 7 laws of Noah. Shelley says we discussed about this. Mary said I heard of them. David Wilder studied them at university. So these are the 7 laws of Noah. What you might be surprised is that according to the rabbis, the 7 laws of Noah, they are not from the time of Noah. They come from before Noah. There is the belief that these sets of laws were given to the world with Adam and Eve. But then nobody followed it. So basically the generation of the flood violated each one of the 7 laws. Now if you look back at them, that was the problem with that generation, that they violated each one of those 7 laws. But we call it the laws of Noah because at the time of Noah, they became formally part of a covenant with God, in which God said, I will never destroy the world anymore. This is all I'm asking from you. Rocky Pollack, you say first courts were led by religions. I would say that most courts of justice at the beginning, they were religious. The law were, though back in the day, there was no distinction between civil law and religious law. Most society had kind of religious law, and that was they were using. Even in Judaism, that's what they were using. And so let's see, according to the rabbis, where these laws are coming from. Let's see. They believe this coming from this verse in the book of Genesis, that it says, I said, Vayitzav Adonai Elohim ala Adam lemor mikol etz hagan hachol tochel umeetz hadad tov v'ra lo tochal mimenu v'yom achalecha mimenu mot tamut. Hashem, God commanded the man, saying, from every tree in the garden you may eat, except for the tree of knowledge of the good and evil, you are not to eat from it, because on the day that you eat from it, it will become certain that you will die. So So let's try to understand this a little better. How did we go from this verse to this, to kind of this? I don't know about you, but when I read this, it doesn't necessarily imply any of this. Well, but you know, by now the ways the rabbis think, and they came out with this. Oh. Rabbi Yochanan explains, Hashem implies the prohibition of blasphemy. As it says in Leviticus 24:16, he who blasphemes the name of Hashem shall die. In other words, he's using Gezerah Shava. We studied this in a previous class. When you take another verse that contains the same word and you connect the two. So you read the context from one verse and you extend that context to the first verse so you can learn something new about that first verse. So that's the methodology used this by Rabbi Yochanan. He will say that the Hashem in this verse implies the prohibition of blasphemy because it's connected to the verse in Leviticus. Then it continues God, because remember here in Hebrew, it says Adonai Elohim. So Adonai is what we call here Hashem, Elohim is what we call here God. So God is a reference to idolatry, for it says in Exodus 23, you shall not have other God, same word, same Elohim, before me. So the two verses are connected. Commanded is a reference to laws of justice. For it says in Genesis 18:19, for I have known him, so he will command his children after him to keep the way of the Lord and righteousness and justice. Okay? Again, another connection with another verse using the same word. The man is the prohibition of murder. God explicitly commands Noah in Genesis 9:6, if one sheds the blood of the man, by man shall his own blood be shed. Saying refers to sexual misconduct or adultery, as the prophet Jeremiah says, saying if a man divorces his wife, etc. From every tree in the garden is an implicit prohibition of theft. It shows the permission is needed to take something that is not explicitly yours. Aha, very interesting. You may eat implies that there are things which may not be eaten, like the limbs of a live animal. Very, very interesting. So it becomes apparent then that a comparison between just 7 Noahide laws and 613 mitzvot cannot be invoked as a supposed indication of the relative limitedness of Noahide system. For the 7 Noahide laws refer to 7 broad areas of legislation, whereas each of the 613 refers to separate, specific, narrowly construed statute. That is to say, the word law, as found in the term 7 laws, refer to a broad legislative area. The word commandment is found in the term 613 commandments, referred to a stark legal dictum qualified as a mere bylaw of the broader area. 66 commandments can be derived from the 7 Noahide laws. So in other words, what it says is, we have 7 Noahide laws, but it shouldn't be taken as that's the only thing. It should be taken, each one of the Noahide laws is a category, and humanity should learn to expand that to create a fair system that it will allow civilization to thrive. And the rabbi said, even from those 7 laws, we can easily come out with 66 commandments. But remember that many of the 613 commandments are ritualistic, that we cannot pretend that many of this ritual that applies to Judaism should be applied to other religions. Doesn't make any sense. So this is what we learn from this. That is, as I said at the beginning, the 7 Noahide laws supposed to be the bare minimum. And now we understand from here that even this bare minimum is not just a minimum. The minimum is the interpretation and the expansion of each one of these 7 laws. The prohibition of idolatry provides that to ensure social stability and personal salvation, the non-Jew does not have to know God, but must abjure false gods. This law refers only to actual idolatrous acts and not to theoretical principles, and, unlike Jews, Noahites are not required to suffer martyrdom rather than break this law. They are, however, required to choose martyrdom rather than shed human blood. In view of the strict monotheism of Islam, Muslims were considered as Noahites immediately. So we have no issue with that. There is no questions that Islam is a Noahide religion. For it contains its own law, and they believe in one God. Whereas the status of Christians was a matter of debate. Since the later Middle Ages, however, Christianity too has come to be regarded as Noahide on the ground that Shituf, associationism, this was the Jewish interpretation of Trinitarianism, is not forbidden to non-Jews. This is a very interesting concept. So in these days, Islam and Christianity are considered Noahide religions. In other words, to make it quick and clear, they are considered kosher religions. It means that we have no issues with them, and they have nothing, no theological problems that it should be an issue for any Jew. And yeah, any comments? Let's continue. Let's see what Maimonides says about this. They must not only accept the 7 laws. When they said they, it means non-Jews, on their own merit, but they must accept them as divinely revealed. This follows from the thesis that all ethics are not ultimately natural, but require a theological framework. Noahide may also freely choose to practice certain other Jewish commandments. And this is something very interesting, because in the last decades, we saw the creation of Noahide communities. I don't know if you ever heard about that. And they are basically supported by certain Hasidic rabbis. So we are talking about ultra-Orthodox Jews that support the creation of Noahide communities. So these are people who are not Christians. They don't believe that Messiah already came. They believe in one God. But they don't necessarily want to become Jews. Because, once you become a Jew, it implies so many other things. You have to commit yourself to fulfill lots of other commandments. That the rabbis believe that people that they were not born Jewish, they don't have to do it. They don't have to eat kosher. They don't have to pray 3 times a day. They don't have to put on tefillin. It's no need for that. It's not that they have to do that in order for their soul to go to heaven. All they have to do is to follow the 7th law of Noah. That's the implication. You were born a Jew, lucky you. Now you have to fulfill the 613 commandments if you're going to go to heaven. But if you were not born a Jew, all you have to do is to follow the Noahide laws. So what these rabbis are trying to help these people is to understand you don't have to become a Jew. You have to become a good Noahide. So they support these communities. Sometimes they send rabbis even to teach them. Google it. Go to YouTube, because there are certain seminars and classes that these rabbis did with Noahide communities. Beautiful lectures. And they even created some kind of prayer books for Noahide, Sidurim, so they can develop some kind of liturgy that is 100% monotheistic. But it's not necessarily Jewish. It's a fascinating thing. It's also a deterrent for conversions. When somebody comes to them and says, I want to convert to Judaism, and they will say, why? All you have to do is to become a Noahide, a proper Noahide. And they will try to convince people to go that way. So go and read about it. It's very interesting. And it's coming from all this thing that is said that people don't really need to become Jews, they just have to become better Noahites, and they have Jewish mentors in order to do that. Let me bring to you one more text about this. It's something about, look at this. I just found that this was very interesting. The Talmud in Masechet Gittin, page 9a and b, brings a baraita stating that Jewish law recognizes all documents made in non-Jewish courts, with the exception of writs of divorce. And we know this. This has been a long time controversy because we have the concept of dina b'malchut dina. It means whatever civil courts say, we should obey, except for the divorce. Doesn't matter if civil law gave you a divorce, you still need a get. Where is that coming from? Well, look at this. We're talking about 13th century. This was already discussed by the rabbis. And now you understand why civil divorce is not enough in Judaism. According to Rashi, the general recognition of documents is based on the dina and the malchut dina, which means the law of the land is your malchut dina is Aramaic for the law of the land is your law, which affords competence to non-Jewish legal systems on the assumptions that they represent universal legal values. In other words, they represent the seven laws of Noah, so there is no contradiction. It's all good. It's kosher. But Jewish marital law is not included in universal law, since there are no Noahide laws pertaining to betrothal and divorce. It's not part of the seven laws of Noah. Doesn't say anything about it. Therefore, dina de malchut dina cannot be applied to Jewish marital law, not even with respect to its evidentiary aspects. Question from Shelley. Because civil law does not take kiddushin into account. Well, kiddushin, I don't know what you mean. Kiddushin is the Hebrew word for marriage. It's just because the Noahide law contains no regulations about marriage. Basically, it's not one of the expectations from God to Noahide to regulate any kind of marriage contracts between parties. So that's why the rabbis decided that they cannot take a law written by somebody who was not commanded by God to write such laws. So, yeah, at least that was the justification to preserve a system where the rabbis are the one who call the shots for this thing. And that's why we are still paying the consequences of that. Any other questions? Let's move on. Let's go to another, one more teaching that I want to share with you. This is very important, and let's read it. Genesis 7:1. God said to Noah, "Come into the ark, you and your household, for I have seen that you alone in his generation are righteous before me." And then this is right before the flood, right? Then the flood came, and we all know what happened. But anyway, this is a totally different topic. Then God said to Noah, Genesis 8, "Go out from the ark, you, your wife, your sons, and your son's wife with you." Which is interesting about this is the language and how at one point God said to Noah, "Go to the ark." You know what is going to happen. So the best thing for you is, based on the circumstances, based on what I'm about to do with the world, go into the ark. But after that, when the circumstances were different, God said to Noah, "Now go out from the ark." Okay, Rocky. Good luck at court. Yeah, be nice to people. Have a good day. Bye. Okay, so what is this verse implying? They come in and go out? Let's see. Let's see what the Baal Shem Tov said about this. he said, the Hebrew word for ark, teva, also means word. Come into the word, that would be one translation, says God. Enter within the words of prayer and Torah study. Here you will find a sanctuary of wisdom, meaning and holiness amidst the raging flood waters of life. Aha! This is another way. Remember, we talk about this. Another way to read the Torah. Now, Baal Shem Tov is not reading the pshat, the literal meaning, so that he's not translating teva as ark, as a physical ark. He's translating teva as word. So now we move into remember we talk about the remez, with everything is an allegory. So now the word for teva or ark is an allegory of something different. Is an allegory to the word or to prayer. So in other words, what it's saying is whenever life feels that it's overwhelming you, what you have to do is you have to enter to the teva, not necessarily the ark, but enter to the word, to the prayer. That's when you have to reach out to God. That's his interpretation. But there is something else. He doesn't stop there. And I said, go out from the ark. This too is a divine commandment. God commands us to enter into the ark, into the sanctums of spirituality we are to create in the material world. But then we must go out of the ark to carry forth its sanctity to the ends of the earth. In other words, sometimes you have to step back from the world and to pray to God. But eventually, you have to get out of that spiritual isolation, and you have to go back into the world. That spirituality, that intense spiritual experience cannot be a goal by itself. It should be a moment where you can actually recharge your batteries to eventually go back to society and to present to the world everything that you gained or you understood and you grew during that spiritual experience. We cannot live in an ark. The ark is temporary. It's only a place that we go at a higher intensity during a crisis. But then eventually what you learn from there has to come back to the world. It's a very powerful teaching. And that's why I love studying Torah from different perspective. You can't stay just on the literal meaning. Sometimes you have to understand the allegory beyond the text. Otherwise, the same text cannot be applied. The same principle cannot be applied to different generations. This is not something that happened to Noah. That's what Rabbi Baal Shem Tov is saying. He's saying this is something that is happening to each one of us in every generation. And we have to learn from this. Jerome, you said to do tikkun olam. Yes, but it's also implying that to do tikkun olam, you need your spiritual preparation. You need to go to the ark first. And then you can present all that knowledge, all that wisdom to the world and to try to repair the world with everything that you learn during that isolation in prayer. It's very, very interesting. And as much as we understand that Noah was a spiritual person, he was a tzaddik, and there is another verse that kind of criticizes Noah, and I wanted to close the class with that because I find it very interesting, because it's showing how we all have our weaknesses. Sometimes we are very spiritual people. We do believe in God. We believe that God rules the world, but not all the time. Sometimes we struggle with our faith. And sometimes we feel that, yeah, I believe in God. God is a real thing, and I have this strong feeling, and sometimes I struggle with that, and I don't find that feeling so easily. So let's see what happened with Noah. And this is again Rashi finding something weird or wrong in a verse. Genesis 7:7. It says, Vayavo Noach ubanav veishto unshei banav ito el ateva mipenei mei hamabul. Noach went into the ark with his sons, his wife, and his sons' wives because of the flood waters. And Rashi said, this is not right. There's something weird about this verse. What is that? Even Noah himself was considered one of those with only modest faith. Noah did not enter the ark until the rains fell and he realized that disaster was imminent. In other words, yeah, he kind of believed, but he wasn't really sure that this was a thing. Maybe I didn't understand God about the rains and thing, but when, basically that Noah didn't enter the ark until the waters were so high that he couldn't stay on the land anymore, and then he entered to the ark. In other words, he failed to understand God from a more intellectual level. This is what happened to many people in the Bible. That sometimes when you experience God based on God's revelations, on miracles that you experience, on stuff like that, it's great, but it's short-lived. It doesn't last for long. Sometimes if we want to have a strong faith, we have to proactively understand God from a more profound and intellectual level. We can't just rely on some feelings and experiences. We have to study, we have to read, we have to absorb the words of teachers and mentors to help us strengthen our faith. And again, this is what happened with Noah. Yeah, he had a modest faith according to Rashi, but I believe it's the same thing that we read before. He didn't have the mentors to teach him God in a different way. So Noah pretty much relied on things that happened to him, and sometimes we fail to read what God is trying to tell us. So we all need somebody else to help us remain strong in our faith, remain strong in our connection with God. Noah didn't have it, but according to the Midrash, after the flood, he became a mentor to other people. And that's why he became a mentor to Abraham. And perhaps this is the same thing that we all have to understand. And I want to close the class with this. We're all going through challenging times in these days. Nobody thought that COVID was going to hit. And now this is getting longer than expected. And but I hope we are all learning something. Eventually, we're going to have future generations that maybe they didn't even experience COVID or other challenges that we are having today. So it's our obligation for us that we did experience it. Maybe we are struggling with our faith, but eventually we are going to make it to the other side, and that will be the opportunity to become Noah after the flood. And we can be a mentor to somebody else to help them to stay strong on their own faith whenever they are going to have to face different challenges in life. So thank you so much for attending the class, for sharing this virtual classroom with me today. It's always a pleasure to study Torah with you. It's great to see that you keep coming week after week. It's a great satisfaction. It's a great blessing to have you there. And again, if this is the first time that you're watching one of our contents online, remember to subscribe to our channel and hit that bell so you will be notified every time we go live or every time we upload something to our channels. Thank you so much for tuning in. Have a wonderful day. Stay safe and hope to see you soon. Bye now.